The Tampa Bay Rays acquired Luis Patiño from the San Diego Padres in December of last year. Patiño flashed 3 pitches and got up to 97 miles per hour with his fastball at the age of just 20. And coming up through the minor leagues, scouts pegged Patiño's slider as a future plus offering. That means it had the potential to be a pitch that would sit about 1 standard deviation above the major league average for sliders. But that grade applied to Patiño's old slider. In 2021, Patiño is throwing a new slider, one that has retained nearly all of its horizontal movement but drastically changed its vertical component. And the result is kind of a sweepy, cutterish pitch that runs across the zone, as opposed to one that vertically breaks down. So if Patiño's slider was already plus, that begs the question, why did the Rays change Luis Patiño's slider? First, let's detail what's actually different about his slider. Last season, the pitch was thrown 84.7 miles per hour. This year, it's up to 85.7 miles per hour. Last season, the pitch had 1.2 inches of vertical movement, and this year it's up to 9.2 inches. And greater vertical movement means it's dropping less. Last season, the pitch had 10.7 inches of horizontal movement. This year, that's slightly down to 9.6 inches. Here's how it looked last year compared to how it looks this year. You can see that even though there's really no change in horizontal, the increase in vertical movement causes the pitch to look much flatter and like it has a lot more horizontal movement. So what gives? Why change the pitch? One obvious response is just that it's simply a better slider. To actually prove that though, we need to first understand what makes a slider good and what makes one better than another. And spoiler alert, those questions have very layered answers. I think one thing rings true in terms of what makes a slider good. Velocity and movement are important. Take 2 sliders in a vacuum, same movement, same axis, same release, etc., and you're going to prefer the one that's thrown harder, not factoring in anything else. Now take 2 pitches, one that moves more than the other, and one that has more velocity than the other, and the question becomes how much movement is being sacrificed in order to gain that velocity. An example of this is Blake Treinen's slider from 2020 to 2021. The pitch lost just under 2 miles per hour, but gained over 11 inches of horizontal movement. That seems like a good trade-off. And I say that with a little bit of bias because the Dodgers are one of the most revered teams in baseball with regards to pitch design and player development. But Treinen is a bit of an outlier. There's basically only one slider in baseball that's thrown as hard as Treinen's with as much horizontal movement. And that's the slider of Cubs reliever Dylan Maples. And that might be the best question to ask when determining whether one slider is better than another. How different is the pitch from the massive sample of sliders we have? See, on one end of the slider spectrum, there's what I like to call down action sliders or gyro sliders. Think Trent Thornton, Luke Jackson, or Brett Anderson. These are thrown by spinning the ball like a football and letting gravity take it downward, and they generally sit in the low to mid 80s. The other end of the slider spectrum is where pitchers like Garrett Cole and Jacob deGrom sit with their sliders. They're thrown much harder in the 88 mile per hour plus range. These sliders have less total movement. They often move less both horizontally and vertically than those football style sliders, or the down action ones as I like to call them. But because they're thrown so much harder, they're often found in repertoires with high velocity, high spin efficiency fastballs. And the vast majority of sliders are somewhere in the middle. Consider it almost a vast ocean of sliders given how many we have. It's just a matter of whether in that ocean they're on an island with a lot of other sliders where there's a ton of comps, or whether it's on an island where there's maybe only 1 or 2 comps. And if it's on an island where there's a ton of comps, perhaps what matters more is actually the composition of the pitcher's repertoire, rather than the singular quality of a given pitch. But I do think there's something to the idea that velocity is a bit of a trump card for sliders. And one theory behind the slider evolution of Patiño is that the Rays came up to him and were like, hey, we like your slider, we think it's good, but we'd love to see if you could actually throw it harder. And by cueing him to throw it harder, maybe what they unintentionally did was actually force Patiño to get behind the ball more. And by him getting behind the ball more, what that's going to do is increase the actual vertical component of the pitch and keep it up in the zone longer. It's not going to drop as much, is what happens when there's an increase in vertical movement. And what they unintentionally could have done by getting him to add that backspin is actually section him off to an island where there's very few comps. They could have looked at the Rapsodo or the TrackMan or whatever they were using and saw him trying to get that pitch harder, throw it harder, more vertical movement, and were like, this is an interesting pitch now. No one else in the major leagues kind of has this offering. He's kind of throwing Brusdar Gratterall's slider, but Patiño gets about 3 inches more vertical and 3 inches more horizontal. It's also kind of like Jameson Taillon's slider, but Patiño is getting more horizontal, which is really the element that makes this pitch unique. It's fascinating that he was able to add this much backspin to the pitch and gain that much vertical movement, but retain about 90% of the horizontal movement he was getting in 2020. Most pitchers throwing 86 to 87 mile per hour sliders with this much backspin or lack of drop don't seem to be able to maintain such a high degree of horizontal movement. There's also another component of what makes a slider good that has to do with how the slider interacts with the pitcher's fastball. This is the principle behind Eno Sayers of the Athletics Stuff Plus model, which was created by Max Bay, who goes by @choice_fielder on Twitter. Stuff Plus is an attempt to distill a pitch's quality into one number, which tells you how much better a pitch or arsenal is by a percent above or below league average. The two heaviest components of what makes most sliders good are the velocity and vertical movement difference compared to that pitcher's primary fastball. Obviously, this has limitations, but that's the foundation of the number. One of those limitations is that the model might really be telling the user what sliders provide the best run value in relation to a fastball, rather than considering the pitcher's entire repertoire. On top of this slider change, Patiño also seems to be aging out of some of the natural cut he had on his four-seam fastball. And this has changed his fastball shape, and the main variables connected to a metric like Stuff Plus. Patiño went from having a below-average fastball based on movement to one that's now right around average for his velocity. Even though I think it lost a little bit of that velocity, it gained enough vertical and horizontal movement that I think the trade-off was good. That fastball now has more carry, and in theory should work better up in the zone. It has more vertical movement. It also has more run or arm side movement. But one thing I don't have an answer to in relation to a metric like Stuff Plus is that Patiño's new slider could grade out worse if we think about the components that go into Stuff Plus. For one, Patiño's slider is moving more vertically. It has less drop. So that vertical movement difference between his fastball and his slider is actually smaller. And the difference in velocity between his fastball and slider has kind of contracted a little bit, as I mentioned. That slider got a little bit harder, and the fastball got a little bit softer. Maybe Tampa Bay has a different internal metric for pitch quality that's accounting for something I'm missing here. Or perhaps a team like the Rays is looking at Patiño's repertoire as the sum of its parts, and also looking long-term, something that's a limitation of a metric like Stuff Plus. The Rays might actually like the current components of Patiño's repertoire more with this new slider from a moldability standpoint, even if a metric is saying that the pitch is not as good. For example, Patiño also throws a changeup, which grades out well based on movement and velocity. And when he came over to the States from Colombia, his primary breaking ball was actually a curveball. There's a chance his old slider shape was too similar to what a hypothetical curveball would look like if it was added back into his repertoire. Those down action sliders I talked about are similar to curveballs in that their primary movement is that biting downward vertical motion, and blurring two pitches together in a repertoire usually isn't ideal. So why not develop a better fit slider for his future repertoire now and envision Patiño as a 4-pitch starter by the time he's 23 or 24? I wish I could give you a better answer than to simply trust what the Rays are doing on this Patiño slider change, but the reality is, given the results on the pitch in 2021 and given how young Patiño is, that might be the proper way to approach this, as there's a realm of possibilities around the reasoning. Maybe it actually is just a better pitch, maybe it pairs better with fastball, or perhaps they are looking at the repertoire of the future in him and thinking that this slider will fit better with a complementary curveball in terms of his fastball and changeup. But I think the way to approach a change like this is to internalize what the Rays are doing and use it as a blueprint to kind of compare and contrast when they possibly tinker with another pitcher. And hopefully we can come up with some reasoning behind the how and why the Rays work such magic with pitchers.